Next question will come from John Schrag from the Forest Grove News-Times, and your question is for Rob Cornilles.
Rob, as Steve noted at the outset, this forum was initiated by the Independent Party of Oregon, a group of people who believe in political parties, just unfortunately for you, not your party or Suzanne's. Given their focus on independence and their reservations about both the Republicans and the Democrats, can you provide 3 specific examples of where you differ from your party on matters of policy that are either now before Congress or we can expect to come before Congress in the next couple years?
Well, I'd be happy to do that, John. First of all, I took a lot of heat during the Republican primary because I refused to sign special interest pledges that were written largely in Washington, D.C. In fact, one of my primary opponents said I was the only Republican that would be in the House that didn't assign certain pledges. I also differed with my party this past year because I feel that the repeal of what they call Obamacare, which I believe is a derisive term, it's the Affordable Care Act, the attempt to repeal that to me was a wasted exercise. Not because it's a bad law. I would have voted against it had I been in Congress last year, but because the reality is this: if the Republican House would have voted to repeal it, which they did, and sent it to the Senate never took it up. And then if they would have taken up, the president never would have signed the repeal of his signature health care law. So I stood apart from Republicans and said, rather than spending time focused on theater, let's spend time focusing on fixing the problem that is lowering health care costs for all Americans so that more people have access to it.
Suzanne Bonamici, it's your question.
Thank you. Yes, I can think of 3 examples right away. First, I look at each piece of policy, regardless of who's supporting it, and push it through. And that happened in the last session when my party Democratic chair didn't want to hear a bill that I thought was good for Oregon business. I convinced that chair to hear the bill. It passed, and it's helping an Oregon business right now. Another place where I've differed, in fact, I've become a leader in my party, and that's on consumer protection issues, cracking down on mortgage fraud, making sure that people who are facing foreclosure have all the opportunities that they can to prevent losing their home, protecting seniors and middle-class families from scams. I've been a leader and strengthened my party in that way. And finally, during this campaign, I could have taken in the easy way in a primary campaign and said I wouldn't support the free trade agreements that were pending before Congress. I took my time and did research and came to a reasoned conclusion about those rather than just take a party line approach on those.
Rob Cornilles, you have 30 seconds if you'd like.
Well, President Obama released a jobs plan about 2 months ago, and shortly after he disclosed it to the American people, Republicans put up roadblocks. One of the things that I think absolutely needs to be done is we need to improve the infrastructure if we're going to grow the economy, especially in Oregon. But I must say, regarding Senator Bonamici, she talks about separating herself from her party, but the reality is she votes 98% of the time with the Democrats in Salem. I don't know how that represents bipartisanship. That represents, to me, more of the same. We can't afford more of the same.
We go back to Suzanne Bonamici. The question now comes from Steve Bagwell. Steve?
Suzanne, I would like to ask you what you think most distinguishes you from your opponent on policy issues as opposed to philosophy or background. And if you could provide some concrete examples, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Yes, there are several differences. My opponent has said that he would rather cut Social Security and Medicare than the defense budget. I believe that those are the wrong priorities. I believe that a woman has the right to make her own health care decisions without interference from politicians. That's another place where we differ. I also believe in a balanced approach to addressing the debt and the deficit. We must not cut our way out. We must not tax our way out. We have to have a balanced approach. Bring people around the table. Send leaders to Congress who have experience balancing budgets, and then we can get the work done.
Rob Cornilles?
I'll use my time to address what the senator mentioned. First of all, as it relates to getting things done, if I'm going to be a 98% voter with my party, I will be the David Wu version of the Republican Party, and that's not going to be helpful to our district. Second, as it relates to Social Security and Medicare, I've never said that we should cut Social Security and Medicare. It's an entitlement that our seniors have earned, they've deserved, they've paid into the system. It needs to be protected. It needs to be preserved for them, and I'll fight hard for that, unlike Senator Bonamici, who supports the Affordable Care Act, which effectively takes $500 billion out of Medicare. And I think that's devastating to that program, which seniors want. In fact, they've chosen, many of them, Medicare Advantage. She would take that option away from them. That's not choice. And secondly, or thirdly, as it relates to real differences, I will be a proponent and an advocate for trade in this district, because so many of our companies in the 1st District are dependent on international trade. Nearly 270,000 jobs in Portland. That's where we clearly differ.
Suzanne Bonamici, you have a rebuttal.
Yes, first I agree with Rob when he said, when he made a statement about David Wu's resignation, that the best thing about it is that we don't need to talk about him anymore. With regard to voting 98% of the time with my party, I've heard Rob say that before. It shows a pretty significant misunderstanding about how the Oregon legislature does its work. In fact, the Republican leader, Senator Ted Ferrioli, voted the same as I did more than 70% of the time. That doesn't show an understanding of how legislators do work. When I have passed legislation, I brought groups together and found bipartisan support. Most of what we do is bipartisan.
Patrick Preston, you are next. Your questions for Mr. Cornilles.
And this question comes from KATU viewer Bridget Hardwick. Bridget Hardwick asks, what are you going to do to get companies to bring manufacturing jobs back to the USA? And I would add, what would you do differently than your opponent?
Well, once again, as I said earlier, companies need certainty. They need predictability. Now, predictability is not very fun in theater or in athletic events, but in business, it's absolutely critical. As a small business owner, I know if I don't know what the tax implication is, if I don't know what the regulatory implication is of starting a new business, of inventing a new product, of innovating, then I'm going to be sitting on my hands. And that's largely what we're seeing in Oregon today and throughout the country. This piecemeal approach that we see in Congress, which isn't working, by the way, is not the way people do budgets, and not the way they plan for the future. And in fact, I would add, this particular Congress for 3 years has not passed a budget. What small business could operate that way? What family could operate that way? What school or nonprofit would ever be successful that way? In order for us to bring jobs back to this country, we need certainty, we need leadership, we need an understanding of what actually creates jobs versus what constrains jobs.
Suzanne Bonamici, your turn.
Yes, bringing manufacturing back to the United States is critical. What we need to do is end tax breaks for companies that ship their jobs overseas. We need to use trade agreements to strengthen labor provisions, environmental provisions, and we need to have more of a communication between our businesses in the community and our education to make sure that the companies here have the workforce that they need. I supported a bill in the last session that brings shop classes back to school. That's something that Commissioner Avakian's working on. And I support that relationship between the businesses and the community colleges and workforce to make sure that we can get the manufacturing jobs back here and rebuild our economy.
Mr. Cornilles, you have 30 seconds if you choose to take it.
I would like to take it. I would add that unless we in Oregon can demonstrate that we are serious about education, that we are serious about creating some of the best educated kids in the country, it's going to be very difficult to attract businesses here that want to grow and expand. Thankfully, we have a few in the 1st District who have been loyal to this district. But I must add, unless we have an advocate, a real champion in Congress, someone who has a strong voice, someone who has the persuasive skills to actually bring jobs here and compete, not only domestically, but internationally, will continue to lag behind other districts in this country.
Teresa Myers, it's your question, and your question now goes to Suzanne Bonamici, please.
Suzanne, national standardized testing has been implemented intending to bring all schools up to a basic level of competency across the country. Oregon schools have bid to bypass the federal standardized testing in favor of using our own markers to determine students' knowledge and progress. What is your view on national standardized testing, and do you believe teachers' pay should be tied to student progress?
You're talking about No Child Left Behind, and No Child Left Behind was a well-intentioned law that was passed to make sure that all of our kids meet certain standards. It has, however, created significant problems in education because it's created an overemphasis on standardized testing. And it's not the standardized testing that actually helps students. What we need, instead of what No Child Left Behind is prescribing, is we need assessments that help students and help teachers, and help students improve and tell teachers what students need to learn. We also need to change No Child Left Behind, which is what I will do in Congress, to make sure we aren't labeling schools as failing. Now, you asked about the teacher pay tied to standardized testing. I do not support that. I support good teacher evaluations that are done with teacher input so that our teachers can improve, but tying teacher pay to standardized testing is the wrong approach that overemphasizes standardized testing.
Rob Cornilles, you're up.
I too believe that the No Child Left Behind was a well-intended act, but I think we've seen over the last 10+ years that it hasn't achieved the results we want. So I support I rather endorse the aggressive approach of the current administration, specifically Secretary Duncan, who is trying to do more in the classroom. But let me speak specifically of the classroom and how we can improve things in Oregon. First and foremost, we must put a trust in our teachers. Studies have shown that there's a direct correlation between the teacher effectiveness and performance of their kids. Teachers need greater evaluations. Teachers need a compensation plan that motivates them. Teachers need also some career paths so that they recognize that there's professional development in their profession. Right now, we're seeing 40% of new teachers in Oregon quit after 3 to 5 years. We also need to make sure that we teach STEM in our classrooms. We need to be first and foremost a leader in teaching science, technology, and engineering and math if we're going to compete, especially in this part of the world.
Suzanne Bonamici, you have 30 seconds.
I have a strong background in advocacy for public education and making our public schools better. In fact, in the last legislative session, I actually worked with a whole group of people and reduced the number of mandates on our teachers and on our school districts so that teachers can spend more time teaching and districts can spend less time filling out paperwork. That's the kind of leadership we need in Congress. I also passed a bill to reduce the number of times that students are taking standardized tests so they have more time to learn critical thinking skills that will lead them to be the next innovators and job creators of tomorrow.
Rob Cornilles has the next question. It's coming from John Schrag. John?
Rob, let's stick on education. During a Democratic primary debate, I don't know if you saw them all, one of their candidates, Representative Witt, indicated some very strong support for public charter schools, while Suzanne Bonamici and Brad Avakian both said they had serious concerns about oversight, a lack of oversight with public charter schools as well. And then Suzanne also added that she feared that innovations that you saw in some charter schools were not being seen in the mainstream schools. What's your take on public charter schools and their role for education?
Well, I have 3 sons, and I've been very involved in their schooling along with my wife, Allison. One of the things I've learned working with kids is that, like adults, they learn differently. Some are better learning inside a classroom, others are learning better in front of a computer. And so we need to treat kids as individuals, just as we do it with adults in the workforce. And I believe that charter schools, virtual schools, homeschooling, all of these are viable alternatives that we ought to encourage. The bottom line is what's best for the kid, not what's best for an association or what's best for the adult. And this is where I probably differ with Senator Bonamici quite a bit. I also believe that if we'll take technology into the classroom, we will be actually helping the kids learn the way that they learn after school hours. When they go home and get on their iPad or they get on their smartphone, this is how they're learning, but in the classroom, we've constrained teachers and not allowed them to bring technology into the classroom, and this is hurting our kids' development.
Suzanne Bonamici.
Yes, I, as a public policy maker, look after what's best for all of the students in a district that I'm representing. And in fact, I sponsored a bill in the last session to bring technology into schools across this state, because it is important that students need to learn technology and learn from technology. However, you asked about charter schools, and what I wanted to say is, yes, we have charter schools in this state. I support them. They need to be accountable. But I do have concerns about equity and access issues. We need to have educational opportunities that are available to all students in this state. And not all students can stay home and learn in front of a computer if they don't have a parent there with them. So as a policymaker, I want to implement policy that's best for all of the students in the district, policy that will help them become the creative, critical thinkers and job creators of tomorrow.
Rob Cornilles, rebuttal is yours.
The bottom line is parents need choice. They should have choice in how their kids are educated. Not only a say, but a choice in the matter. And I support any opportunity we give parents to do that. I would also add that I think corporate America has a responsibility here to contribute to the learning process, to utilize what they have learned in growing business, in bringing prosperity to their employees. They need to bring that same technology and know-how into the classroom. There needs to be a reason for them to do that. We need to build partnerships between the business community and the educational community.